So Charlie Kirk went on Tucker Carlson's new show, and he seemed very confused here. He ended up arguing for left economic positions, even though the whole brand he built up is the opposite.
And so what did they decide to do as soon as the Berlin Wall fell? And almost to the date, Russell Kirk was right. Mass immigration in 1990, George H.W. Bush signed in this compromise with Ted Kennedy to bring in millions of people, unrestricted, into our nation, of this great bargain of cheap labor and then cheap votes. So both sides kind of got a win out of that. 1994, Bill Clinton signs NAFTA because we decided it would be a good idea to deindustrialize the backbone of our nation. And then 1999, one that might surprise people, that as a conservative I think we should find disgusting, was the repeal of Glass-Steagall. Was when Bill Clinton went out of his way to pander to the financial services lobby that largely led to cheap money, and I think the blurring of lines between commercial banking and investment banking. And then finally, China's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001.
Right.
And all four of those things, I believe, was the conservative movement or the people in charge chasing momentary pleasure and not preserving the good, with no commitment to permanence or to trying to pass something that has worked, that is moral and beautiful to my generation.
All right, so let me walk you through this. Charlie Kirk, his lane has always been, he was the more traditional conservative guy. He was the more libertarian on economics conservative guy. So in other words, much more like Ben Shapiro and the movement conservatives than like Steve Bannon and the paleo conservatives, Steve Bannon, Pat Buchanan, those paleo conservatives. So that was always his lane. That was what he would argue for. Then in the Trump years, Trump came along, and in the debates, he made some comments that other Republicans wouldn't make. Like, for example, he would talk about, I want to protect Social Security and Medicare. I want to stop outsourcing our jobs. He would hit NAFTA, among other things. And so Charlie Kirk, I think what he did is he sensed the popularity of Trumpism, and then he sort of changed his tune from the Ben Shapiro more libertarian on economics line instead of populist, and he tried to sound a little more populist. And so the rhetoric was still, oh, I'm all about free markets, free markets, free markets, but then there would be deviations to the free market argument where he would bring up stuff like this, stuff like NAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China. He even brought up the Glass-Steagall repeal here. But here's where it just gets so absurd, is that, so he talks about the Glass-Steagall repeal being wrong. He's correct about that. Trump, I remember when there was a story about Trump where they were like, Trump is trying to get Glass-Steagall put into the Republican platform. Remember this at the convention in like 2016? That was reported on. And see, here's the amazing thing. Guys, it was all a branding exercise because Donald Trump as president, he did none of those populist things that he said he was in favor of. So outsourcing increased under the Trump administration. It increased. Yes, he slapped down TPP, but when he renegotiated NAFTA, he put a lot of the provisions that were in the original TPP into the new NAFTA. It was a big giveaway to pharma, for example. So he didn't lift a finger to try to repeal Glass-Steagall. In fact, to try to bring back Glass-Steagall. In fact, he did the opposite. He did more deregulation. He gutted the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is an incredibly populist agency. It returns money to defrauded Americans from big financial institutions. Gutted the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, got rid of the regulations and dropped the lawsuits on the predatory payday loan industry. He did colossal deregulation, and he did the 2017 tax cuts for the wealthy. 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. So in other words, Trump ran as a pseudo-populist, governed as a traditional conservative. He governed as George W. Bush on steroids. That's what he did. And Charlie Kirk was a huge defender of Trump. So which is it, Charlie? Are you going to defend Trump, who did standard, conservative Republican economics, who did standard Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, free market enterprise approach, laissez-faire capitalism? Are you going to defend that, which is what Trump is, or are you going to have it like what you said here? Because you can't have it both ways. Either you support the things you said here, or you don't. And if you support the things you said here, you better vociferously condemn Trump right now. Because you say you support these things, Trump was bad on all of those issues you mentioned. So are you going to say, hey, he was wrong on all these issues? He was terribly wrong on all these issues. I'm calling it out because this is what I think on these issues, and it's not what he did. Are you going to do that? See, this is how you know he's either massively confused or this is dishonest. It's one or the other. Either you're confused about it all or it's dishonest. Because if I'm talking about what I support and the politician who I 100% backed and supported as president, if Bernie Sanders became president and he didn't fight for or lift a finger to do Medicare for all, or if he did the opposite, more people lost health insurance under his administration, I would have to call him out for that. I'd be like, I support Medicare for all, and the guy who I thought supported Medicare for all didn't lift a finger for it, and if anything, more people lost health insurance. He didn't do the right thing. I'm calling him out. That's what I would do, because that's intellectually honest. But what he's doing is he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. Let me argue for left economics when I previously used to argue for right-wing economics, and let me argue for left economics when the president I supported implemented hard right economics. So which is it? See, my sense of it is this, guys. Everybody senses the way the winds of the country, and they know that working people are getting screwed now, and they're not doing too well, and so they want help. They know the government can be used for good now. Just like we cut some checks. Trump cut a $600 check. Biden cut a $1,400 check. Expanded the child tax credit, things of that nature. People are like, oh shit, the government can do good things. So now people expect the government to do decent things. And in that political environment, you can't hold on to the old movement conservatism and the Ben Shapiro line of free market, free market, free market. Go fuck yourself. The government shouldn't do anything to help you. So this is an attempt to go along with the times and say, yeah, NAFTA was bad. Glass-Steagall repeal was bad. Permanent normal trade relations with China was bad. And the mass immigration thing, I mean, again, this is what these guys do is they talk about that as if the immigrants are the reason why working people are screwed in this country. No, it's not. Immigrants and working people are in the same boat. And it's the 1% who rigged the system and is stealing all the money and running out the back door with it. So that's where you stop scapegoating people who are more poor and worse off than you. Put the blame where it actually belongs. But that's neither here nor there. He's confused. Charlie Kirk is a very confused man. He went from arguing standard libertarian Republican economic arguments. He went from that to let me follow Trump and start sounding mildly populist, to watching Trump not be populist at all and do standard right-wing economics, to ignoring that and still pretending to be somewhat populist on economics. I just don't see a very straightforward, honest conversation happening here. I see some wave riding, or I see confusion, or I see dishonesty. But I definitely don't see a straightforward argument and beliefs that never changed, or I sense a little opportunism too. Okay, everybody's going that way, so let me pretend to be populist, and guess what? Final point is this. Tucker and Charlie Kirk, even though every now and then they say these things that seem mildly populist on economics, all of the politicians who they end up supporting and cheerleading, none of them do populist economics at all. So don't give me that shit about I'm a populist, and like Josh Hawley pretends to be a populist. He wasn't even for $15 minimum wage. He was against pro-union legislation. Don't tell me you're a populist on economics and you're against $15 minimum wage and against pro-union legislation. That means you're not a populist. That's what that means. And every now and then, if you deviate from the line, but you end up voting like fucking Mitch McConnell, I'm not going to give you credit for that. I don't care if you pretend to sound like Noam Chomsky, then you vote like Mitch McConnell. If you pretend to sound like Noam Chomsky, and then you vote like Mitch McConnell, or back people who vote like Mitch McConnell, you're a lot more like Mitch McConnell. And that sort of sums up the entire thing here about Charlie Kirk and Tucker. They could pretend to sound like Noam Chomsky as much as they want, but if at the end, all of that support that they're garnering is redirected to support standard Republican politicians, it's bullshit. And if anything, it's even more nefarious because at least Ben Shapiro's open and honest and upfront about the things he believes, and they're bad. These guys are not open and upfront and honest, but they support the same bad people. So there you have it.